Hey there. So today I'm going to cover like a bunch of different topics. It's not going to be one unified video, and so it perhaps might go a little bit over long, but I figure if you like it, watch it, and if you don't, just skip ahead to the next topic. Okay, the topics I'm going to cover today are the following. I'm going to talk about the situation in Kharkov, where I'm located at this time. Something has happened. I don't know what, but we'll talk about it. Number two, I want to talk about the bombing in Yarovin in the extreme west of Ukraine, but just about 12 miles, roughly 20 kilometers from the border with Poland. That happened on Sunday, and I think it's proving to be incredibly important, and I'll discuss why. The third thing I want to talk about is the Zelensky regime and its latest moves and the things that are happening in Kiev that I think indicate that the regime is falling apart. And well, I'll get into that in just a moment. And the fourth thing I'm going to talk about is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, of all places. And what's going on in Saudi Arabia, what's been going on in India, insofar as the American financial situation is concerned, and how the situation in Saudi Arabia is an existential crisis that is brewing for the United States. In its way, the situation in Saudi Arabia is as important to the United States as the situation in Ukraine is to Russia. And so I'm going to be talking about these four topics. Okay. Now, before I get started, I just want to do a quick introduction on the subject of abductive reasoning. As some of you may know, I studied philosophy at Dartmouth, philosophy and Russian history. It was a double major. And I learned that in logic, there are actually three kinds of logic as defined by the American philosopher C.S. Peirce. There is deductive inferences, inductive inferences, and abductive inferences. Now, the first one, deductive inferences, that's the one we all know, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. The conclusion flows and is contained by the premises. The second one, inductive inference, is where the conclusion flows from or follows from the premises. Like, for instance, the sun always rises, therefore tomorrow the sun will rise. I mean, that seems pretty obvious. The examples previously indicate that something will happen next. And the third form, abductive inference, that is actually one of the most subtle and important forms of reasoning. It's actually the basis of the scientific method. Abductive inference is basically taking data points, and from these data points, concluding something that explains the data points. Let me give you an example. Suppose you arrive home and your dog is looking extremely guilty, and he sort of like avoids you and sort of like whimpers and sort of like hides himself. And you think that's strange. And you go to the kitchen and you look around, and the chicken that you'd taken out of the freezer to thaw out during the day, well, it's gone. And there's an empty, ripped up package where the chicken used to be. And so you take these two data points, the chicken is gone, and the dog looks very guilty, and you conclude, of course, that the dog ate the chicken, right? That's abductive inference. And it is central to the scientific method, because the scientific method starts with a hypothesis. And how you come to a hypothesis? Abductive inference. You see data points and you guess, essentially, oh, maybe this is going on. And from there you articulate a hypothesis. And once you have articulated that hypothesis, you design experiments to prove or disprove the hypothesis. So you see what is abductive inferences. It's speculation, but it's reasoned based on data points. And so in this conversation, I'm going to be talking about these four different topics. And because of the fog of war, I mean, the whole place is cloudy as all get out. So I'm just going to have to sort of like make certain speculative leaps, sort of like to figure out what is going on. And my interest in doing this is not so much idle speculation, but more or less try to figure out what might be going on in this fog of war. And if my abductive inferences are reasonable or unreasonable, I'll leave that up to you. But the whole point is to try to figure out the lay of the land, as it were, and where we are headed in this conflict. Okay? Okay, so insofar as Kharkov is concerned, the first topic. See, I'm here, and there's no other way to say it, but there seems very definitely to have been a change in the air. The shelling is going on just about round the clock, okay? And I don't know if it's strictly Russian shelling or it's back and forth, but the shelling is consistent. I'm near the center of the city, and it is consistent shelling. I've also been noticing that random tanks are crossing the city, usually from north to south. And one of the things I had never realized is that tanks are loud. I mean, they're really loud. You know, if you're within 400 meters, roughly a quarter of a mile of a tank, you're going to know it. Because it's not merely, you know, like the sound of a tractor. It's like a tractor amped up to 11. I mean, you can feel it in your bones. I mean, it's rather surprising, to tell you the truth. Like the first time I saw an airstrike back on March 2nd, I saw it from my window of my apartment where I was staying at the time. I'm no longer there. And well, when I saw it, I was like shocked at the noise of it, shocked at the whole experience, because it's not like the movies. The movies just give you it's trivial in comparison to the real thing. And the same with tanks. When they roll down the street, it's not like in the movies. It's a lot louder, and you can feel it in your bones. And so I've been seeing a lot of movement. The tanks that I've seen in the distance, I could not tell you who they belong to. I'm assuming that they are of the Ukrainian armed forces. But it seems that something is going on in the south of the city. Beyond that, I could not tell you. There's been consistent smoke from the south of the city. There has been shelling, explosions going on in the south of the city, beyond the river, by the way. But beyond that, I could not tell you what it means. I mean, there's no valuable information that I can give on a tactical level as to what's going on. But it seems that the whole situation has been ramped up. It's just fiercer fighting, basically. So that seems to be going on in Kharkov. But the essential services for the citizenry, for the civilians, they're operating as normal. And the trains are leaving the city. And I mean, if you forget about the noise of the explosions going on outside the city feels like on a lazy Sunday morning. That's how it feels. You know, empty, the streets are empty, but, you know, yeah, that's what's going on in Kharkov. Okay. Sorry if it's not a particularly good report, but that's all I got. Sorry about that. Now, the second point I wanted to talk about is the Yavoriv attack on Sunday. Okay, so this is the International Peacekeeping and Security Center that was just to the west of the city of Lviv, like I said, about 12 miles or 20 kilometers from the Ukrainian-Polish border. Now, this was the staging area for approximately 1,000 foreign fighters who had come to Ukraine to join the Ukrainian armed force and potentially fight the Russians. Now, these soldiers, for the most part, seem to have been NATO soldiers. There seems to have been a smattering of soldiers from South America, Brazil, and the Brazil issue is important because there was one viral video of a Brazilian talking about his experiences that went around the globe. Like I said, NATO fighters, French, American, Chilean. There's always a Chilean. Chile is like Florida, man, you know? Anyway, there were like fighters from everywhere. And the word is that there were about 1,000 fighters at the International Peacekeeping and Security Center, which is basically a NATO center. It's where NATO soldiers, officers, non-commissioned officers would go to train Ukrainian fighters. And this center was destroyed on Sunday morning, by approximately 30 Russian cruise missiles. And the initial word was that there had been only 35 dead and about 135 wounded. But the number has risen considerably. At this time, it seems that 200 of these foreign legionnaires are dead. And they were killed before this foreign legion could be even properly assembled and equipped and turned into a coherent fighting force. They were just blown out. And the day before, the Russians had said that they considered any foreign soldier to be simply a criminal, and that they would treat them as such, and they would attack them. And they did. The next day, they attacked them ferociously. 30 cruise missiles hit the center. And at this time, 3 days after the event, the death toll is at 200. And what happened also is that we have seen video evidence of many of the people who were there, eyewitnesses, people who were a part of this at this legion that was in the process of being formed. Well, they left the country. They ran away, and some of the accounts are they're pretty heavy. I posted them on my Telegram channel. A link is in the description below. Uh, Basically, it seems that they didn't have a good time. Let's put it that way. Now, this incident, here I'm going to speculate a little bit, a little abductive inferences. This incident, I think, has turned out to be very, very crucial because at the time that it happened, some contacts I had in different parts of the world said how the mainstream media was reacting sort of like startled by the events at Yavoriv. Sorry about that. I'm terrible with names. They were very startled by this event. My friend Alex Mercouris on the Duran said how the Financial Times in particular, they were like sort of like stunned by the whole incident. And after that, the notion of sending NATO fighters has really been ramped down. I suspect that there's a lot more going on here. I think that this attack, spectacular and spectacularly effective it was from the point of view of the Russians, I think it has scared NATO very, very badly. Because the eyewitnesses said that there was no warning whatsoever, there was no air raid siren, nothing. The soldiers there were caught completely by surprise in their bunks because this happened in the early morning hours. And, they were slaughtered by these cruise missiles. And these cruise missiles appeared to have been fired from Russian airspace. Now, that's a few hundred kilometers away. Offhand, I think it's like 300 or 400 kilometers away. That is quite the distance. And cruise missiles, these were cruise missiles, not hypersonic missiles. They take a while to cover that amount of ground. And so the fact that, well, it's quite obvious that the NATO air defense umbrella would have covered this center, because this center was a place that NATO had used before the conflict. And so it's reasonable to infer that a center that's barely 20 kilometers rather, inside of Ukraine, it would have easily been covered by the NATO air defense system. But the NATO air defense system did not give a warning of these approaching cruise missiles. So it's two possibilities. Either, number one, the NATO air defense systems didn't pick up the cruise missiles, or number two, the NATO air defense systems were jammed somehow by the Russians. It doesn't matter which of the two options is correct. The bottom line is that these missiles eluded the NATO air defense systems, at least the radar systems that could have given a warning that they were incoming. And therefore, I think that the NATO officers are realizing that they don't have what it takes to defend against Russian cruise missiles and Russian air defenses. They don't have what it takes. And the notion of setting up a no-fly zone is absurd. I think it scared NATO very badly because it caught them completely by surprise. I mean, the deaths of all these soldiers without any kind of warning whatsoever, any kind of heads up, it must have really made NATO freak out. And that's why all of a sudden it seems that the noise coming from official sources seems to have come down quite a bit as to the notion of NATO doing something insofar as no-fly zone or even participation in this conflict. I think that this attack on God damn the name of it, Yavoriv, I think the attack there by the Russians will prove to have been a turning point in NATO participation. Okay? I mean, that's what I'm thinking. And I think it's really important, and I don't think that people are realizing it at this time. But retrospectively, it will be seen as the turning point, the moment when NATO decided, no, this is not our fight. Okay? Now, the third point I want to cover is the Zelensky regime and what's going on internally. Well, the long and short of it is the Zelensky regime is falling apart. Okay? Now, the rumor is that they are doing a reshuffle of the general staff, and they are bringing in the general who was in charge of the Eastern Ukrainian army. They are bringing him to Kiev to handle the defenses of Kiev in the face of an eventual Russian assault on the city. Now, the situation, militarily speaking, on the ground is catastrophic for the Ukrainian armed forces. The Russians have successfully surrounded pretty much all of the nodes of combat in the country. They've surrounded Kiev, they've surrounded Kharkov, they've surrounded Mariupol, they have surrounded in multiple pockets, multiple cauldrons, as the Russians called it, the various elements of the main battle group of the Ukrainian armed forces, which totals something like, and this is reputable sources claiming that it's something like 76,000 fighting men, that they are completely surrounded in various pockets of between 10,000 and 20,000 soldiers spread out in eastern Ukraine. And all of these pockets cannot get resupplied or relieved. They can't even get gasoline. And so it's just a matter of time that all of these pockets of the Ukrainian armed forces will eventually either surrender or be annihilated. And I'm not saying this in any kind of cheerleading way. I'm just saying this is the military reality on the ground at this time. The Russians seem to be getting ready to take Odessa. There is no Russian military force in Odessa. Then they basically ignored it. And it seems that once Mariupol falls completely, which seems a definite eventuality, they will turn to Odessa and make an amphibious landing of some sort. I would not be surprised if at this time the Russian political leadership is reaching out to the local Odessa political leadership and trying to find a way to simply take the city without a shot being fired. I mean, that would seem the reasonable thing for the Russian armed forces to do at this time, because it's clear that the entire coast of Ukraine that faces the Black Sea on its eastern side, east of Crimea, the Sea of Azov, that entire territory, it's pretty much in the hands of the Russians, or will be inevitably in the next, say, 72 to 96 hours. And so the Zelensky regime seems to be steeling itself for a last stand in Kiev. Now, what's going on is that the prime minister of Poland, of Slovakia, and several bigwigs of Croatia and Poland are taking a train from Poland to Kiev under the auspices of the Russians. The Russians are guarding the trainway, the train tracks, and guaranteeing the security of these politicians. I have no doubt that the Russians are going to live up to their end of the bargain. The question becomes whether the Ukrainians, or rather the thugs of the Zelensky regime, will try to blow up the train to cause a, diplomatic crisis that will bring in NATO into the fight. Because you have to understand that the Zelensky regime, all it wants at this point is for NATO countries to come into the conflict. Because even though Zelensky is sort of intimating that he no longer wants Ukraine to be part of NATO, I mean, he's basically admitting what he should have admitted a month ago. But now that, spilt milk and this special operation is happening, now he's saying, oh, well, yeah, Ukraine doesn't have to be part of NATO. Too late, too little, too late. Well, it seems that other members of the Zelensky regime, the thugs in it, because they are thugs and don't pretend otherwise, and I'll explain why in just a second. Well, they seem hell-bent for leather on trying to pull in the United States and NATO into this war. And I think that the thing in Yavoriv is what's keeping NATO out. I think that it scared them. It scared them very badly. And I think that the Zelensky regime is realizing it too, in spite of themselves. Now, the Zelensky regime, they are murderers, they are thieves, they are thugs, they are kidnappers, because they've done all of these things during the time of this war. I've talked about it before previously, how that they have kidnapped, tortured, and murdered people. They kidnapped and tortured and murdered 2 mayors so far. They, summarily executed one of their own negotiators. This is true. They have released footage of one of their SBU goons abusing and manhandling one of their own members of parliament. The Zelensky regime, they're thugs, okay? Don't pretend otherwise. Anybody who claims that they're not, it's lying. They are thugs. And what's interesting is that in the last couple of days, as of yesterday, there was a journalist, a Zelensky regime journalist, who went on Channel 24 here in Ukraine, which is a big deal. And he basically called for the murder of Russian children. And all kinds of outrage here. He said that in order to defeat Russia, what you had to do was just kill their children so that they could not, flourish as a people. I mean, he's talking about genocide of the Russian people, man. And you know who he quoted? Adolf Eichmann. Really? That Adolf Eichmann. The Adolf Eichmann of The Final Solution, Adolf Eichmann. And yeah, this appeared on television in Ukraine. Oh yeah, don't take my word for it, man. I always tell you, don't take my word for anything that I report. Go check it out for yourself. It's all over the internet, on Twitter and all the rest of it, and people are freaking out because the gloves are coming off, but more importantly, the masks are coming off. And it seems clear to me, and here is another little abductive inference, that the Ukrainians, the people in the Zelensky regime, they realize that they're losing. And now that they're losing, they feel that they don't really have to pretend anymore. You know how it is when you're at the end of something, and you know that you've been holding it in and trying to be the good boy, right? And then finally you realize it's lost, it's over. So screw it. I'm just gonna rip off that mask and I'm gonna show them who I really am. Yeah, that's what's happening, and we're seeing more of it. We're seeing these guys going out there and saying all kinds of things that a lot of their supporters in the West are trying desperately to explain, but of course you can't explain it because it's the truth. It's not Russian propaganda, see? If, the Russian Ministry of Defense says that the sky is blue, is that Russian propaganda? Huh? You tell me. If the Russians say these guys are neo-fascists who want Russian people dead, and they've been killing Russians for the past 8 years in the Donbass, which is true, and the guys finally, in desperation, in frustration, in whatever emotion is going through their head, finally rip off their own mask and show that they think that Adolf Eichmann was aces and they want to kill every Russian child. Is that Russian propaganda? Or is that the reality that a lot of people in the West didn't want to face? Huh? You tell me. So that's what's going on with the Zelensky regime. It's falling apart because they have no chance of winning. The regime is falling apart because now that it's clear that NATO will not join, they're out of options, out of cards. And they know the thugs in the Zelensky regime, the goons in the SBU and the Azov Battalion and S-14 and Right Sector, all these fascist, murdering, thieving thugs, they know that the Russians know who they are, number one, and the Russians want them dead. That's the other thing, okay? And the Russians will go through the rigmarole of like doing a trial and all the rest of it, but the outcome is clear, okay? Those guys are going to hang high, and they know it. And so they're desperate, and a desperate animal can do anything. So this might prove to be a very, very dangerous period. We've already seen it with them firing a missile with cluster bombs into the middle of Donetsk, far from any kind of military target, specifically aimed to kill Russian civilians in Donetsk. They did that 2 days ago, okay? And there's video evidence all over the place. It's horrifying. Something like 20 civilians were killed, and something like 30-odd civilians were severely injured, including children and the rest of it. And that happened. And I think that more of that is going to continue to happen, unfortunately. Because as these guys go down, they will try to bring down as many people as possible because they don't care about the Ukrainian people. They only care about themselves and their rage and anger and hatred that they want to inflict on the world. Okay? I mean, don't be fooled. Okay, the fourth issue I want to talk about is Saudi Arabia. Well, see, these sanctions that the United States imposed on Russia, they were a disaster for the United States, okay? Why were they a disaster for the United States? Well, you see, these sanctions, not only was it, hurting specific oligarchs and higher-ups in the Russian government and Russian society, it also involved a couple of things that are really crucial. Number one, and I think the most crucial of all, was that the Americans essentially stole half of Russia's foreign currency reserves. Now, I'm finding it a hard thing to believe that the Russians were so stupid as to have left in deposit over $300 billion in Western financial institutions and not have planned that, or at least game played, or figured out a way to avoid the fact that the Americans were going to steal their money. Because the Americans and the British, the West, they've stolen sovereign wealth before. They stole Venezuela's gold in London. Oh yeah, the British did that, of course, under the direction of the Americans. And the Americans stole the Afghans' gold. I forget how much it was in Venezuela. I want to say something like 20 billion in gold. And the Afghans, I think it was 9 billion in gold. Okay? The sums don't really matter. I mean, they were huge, of course, but that's not the point. The point is that the precedent had been set. And the Russians, of course, had a lot more money. And so why is it that the Russian central bank was so foolish as to have left so much money in the West, assuming that this is true, okay? Because it's very sophisticated financial deposits. It's not like, you know, your bank account where you just deposit some money and it's there or it's not there. No, it's more complicated than that. So let's not get into the details of that. But assuming that this is true, you have to ask yourself, why did the Russians so foolishly do this? But anyway, regardless of the foolishness or non-foolishness of the Russians, the fact that the Americans basically went and stole this money from the Russians scared a lot of people. It scared the Saudis very, very badly. And this is very important because, you see, the entire financial architecture of the United States depends on Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia selling its oil in dollars. That's how the United States can afford to live as it does. Now, Saudi Arabia has announced that it is exploring options to sell oil to China in Chinese currency, the yuan, also called the renminbi. Now, this is an existential crisis for the United States. It really is. Because if the Saudis start selling their oil in non-dollars, doesn't matter what the currency is, but it's just not dollars, then the demand for dollars will fall, the value of dollars will fall, and therefore inflation will ratchet up even further than it currently is. I mean, this is really existential for the United States. Now, the de facto leader of Saudi Arabia is a man called Mohammed bin Salman, MBS for short. Now, Mohammed bin Salman is an extraordinary individual. I've read a couple of biographies of the man, and he really is extraordinary. He is a man of enormous intellect, enormous energy, enormous ruthlessness. I mean, you don't get to be in his position by being a nice guy, or stupid, or lacking in energy and drive, okay? So you have to understand that you're dealing with a man who is, he's got balls, he's got brains, he's got brass. He's the whole package, okay? I'm not saying this, you know, as a fanboy. I'm saying it as a practical reality. So the issue becomes, is he doing this as a way to prod the Americans to give him more favorable conditions in other areas that he's interested in? Or is he exploring this possibility of de-dollarizing Saudi Arabian oil because he recognizes that the United States is going down the tubes and he wants to exit that sinking ship and attach himself to China and that ship that is rising, you know, to mix my metaphors, but you know what I'm saying, see? And it could be that MBS himself doesn't really know. Maybe he's just exploring this with those two parallel tracks in mind. Maybe to prod the Americans to get better deals on whatever issues that he's interested in, and maybe at the same time see if maybe China is a better long-term partner. I mean, let me rephrase that. Saudi Arabia, MBS, they know that China is a better long-term partner. The issue becomes, when is Saudi Arabia going to detach itself from the United States and join China? That's what MBS is trying to figure out, because it's inevitable that the United States is going down the tubes. And so here comes the issue for the United States. Right now, everybody's freaking out over Ukraine and all this, stand with Ukraine, blah, blah, blah. But if the Saudis carry out this plan to de-dollarize, that's the end of the American economy. I'm not kidding. I'm not being hyperbolic. And you ask anybody who knows anything about modern finance and global economics, and this is the truth. The United States deficit depends on the rest of the world buying oil in dollars. If this does not happen, the United States will not have access to the funding necessary to cover its deficit. If it doesn't have access to this funding, the only recourse is to either cut spending or raise taxes or print money, which is what Weimar Germany did. And look how they turned out. You see what I'm saying? And so the United States, let me phrase it. And so the issue of Saudi Arabia de-dollarizing is existential to the United States. And here's a kicker, a very subtle kicker. India. India is the largest country in the world by population. It has enormous needs for energy and all the rest of it. The United States has threatened India with sanctions because India does not want to condemn Russia and does not want to alienate Russia, because India and Russia have long-standing ties going back decades. Decades even before, even back when Russia was the Soviet Union. And they have huge trade, mutual trade. And so India and Russia, they both have a vested interest in maintaining a strong relationship. India does not want to alienate Russia under any set of circumstances. And yet the United States is threatening India with sanctions. And so what did the Indians do? Well, yesterday, Prime Minister Modi gave a speech where he basically doubled down on the relationship of India with Russia and said, Russia has stood by India when nobody else did, when the Americans were with the Pakistanis. And so we would be very poor friends if today we did not stand with Russia. I mean, that's as clear as you can get insofar as that kind of situation is concerned, right? And so the Indians, they cut a deal for 3 million barrels of oil that they're going to buy from Russia, and they're going to pay for it in rupees, not dollars. That is, the Indians are de-dollarizing. Now, 3 million barrels of oil is not that much in the global market, but it's a big first step. And if the Indians continue with this process of de-dollarizing and buying oil and other commodities in rupees or rubles or Chinese yuan or any other currency, it doesn't matter. Well, that's going to affect the United States now, won't it? The United States will no longer have the reserve currency. The United States economy will start to crater even worse than it's cratering right now. The Saudi Arabia thing. And my thinking is that if MBS pushes forward his notion of de-dollarizing and pivoting Saudi Arabia to China, I think that the United States will all of a sudden start to make noises about Saudi Arabia. And I would not put it past this current administration to go so far as to invade Saudi Arabia, insane as though that may sound. But they might need to invade it, because Saudi Arabia, that is not trading oil in dollars, that is an existential crisis for the United States. To put it in comparable terms, financially speaking, this is as if the Chinese put intercontinental ballistic missiles on Catalina Island off the coast of California and Nantucket Island off the coast of Massachusetts. It's intolerable for the American economy for Saudi Arabia to de-dollarize. It's intolerable, even more intolerable, for the Saudis to use Chinese currency. So anyway, this is what's going on. It's fascinating shit, okay? As a historian, or a history student, let's put it that way, because I'm not a proper historian, just interested in the shit. This is amazing. We are living in the most remarkable period in 100 years, okay, or 80 years since the end of the Second World War. This is truly extraordinary, what we are experiencing, what we are watching. We are watching the world's hegemon, the United States, collapsing before our eyes. We are seeing the rest of the world look at America and decide, I want off this ride. That's what we are seeing right now. This is unbelievable, unprecedented. And again, just like with the Zelensky regime that is losing and is therefore lashing out, I expect the United States to start lashing out something awful. Yeah, and that's why I can say that it's very possible that they will invade Saudi Arabia, insane though that may sound. Because an empire, a government, a person who is drowning, he lashes out. He will do anything to survive. And in his panic, he will make his situation worse. And that's what I think is going to happen with the United States of America. Catch you tomorrow.